The courthouse smelled like old wood and broken families. I sat alone at the defendant's table, my hands folded on top of a leather-bound journal that had been locked in my grandfather's safe for 37 years. Across the aisle, my father sat flanked by his attorney, a woman in a $3,000 suit who looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. My mother sat in the second row, her arms crossed, her expression the same one she'd worn my entire life. Disappointment mixed with mild disgust. My brother Marcus sat beside her, scrolling through his phone. He hadn't looked at me once since we'd entered the courtroom. All rise. Judge William Harrington entered, his black robe flowing behind him. He was in his early 60s, gray-haired, with the kind of face that suggested he'd seen every trick in the book and was unimpressed by any of them. He settled into his chair and looked down at the papers before him. Case number 2024, CUB 8847, Michael Chung versus his daughter, Sarah Chung, regarding the contested estate of Colonel James Chung. I looked up, his gaze settling on me for a moment before moving to my father's attorney. Ms. Whitmore, you may proceed. Jennifer Whitmore stood, smoothing her skirt. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of an adult child attempting to manipulate the probate process for personal gain. My client, Michael Chun, is the sole surviving son of Colonel James Chun. The Colonel's will clearly states that his estate, valued at approximately $2.8 million, should be divided equally between his two children, Michael and his daughter Rebecca. She gestured toward me without actually looking at me. The defendant, Sarah Chun, is Michael's daughter. She has no legal claim to any portion of the estate. However, 6 months ago, she produced a document claiming to be a codicil to the will, allegedly signed by Colonel Chun just 3 weeks before his death, leaving her the entirety of his estate. My father's attorney paused for effect. Your Honor, Colonel Chun was 84 years old when he allegedly signed this document. He had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He was on significant pain medication. We believe this document is either a forgery or was obtained through undue influence while the Colonel was not in his right mind. I took a slow breath, my hands still resting on Grandpa's journal. My attorney had quit 2 weeks ago. He'd said he believed me, but he couldn't afford to take on a case against Preston, Whitmore and Associates on contingency when the other side had already filed a motion to sanction him for frivolous claims. I was representing myself now. Judge Harrington looked at me. Miss Chun, do you have representation? No, Your Honor. I'm representing myself. He frowned slightly. Do you have a response to Ms. Whitmore's opening statement? I stood. My legs felt steady, which surprised me. Your Honor, my grandfather was a decorated Air Force colonel. He served for 32 years. He received the Distinguished Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, and the Bronze Star. He was many things, but he was never confused, never incompetent, and never manipulated by anyone, least of all his 28-year-old granddaughter. That's a lovely tribute, Ms. Whitmore interrupted, but it's not a legal argument. I'm not finished, I said quietly. I looked at the judge. My grandfather left me his entire estate because I was the only person in this family who ever actually cared about him. I visited him every Sunday for 10 years. I drove 4 hours each way. I sat with him during his chemo appointments. I held his hand when he was scared. I listened to his stories. I glanced at my father. He was staring at the table. My father visited him twice in the last 5 years of his life, once for Christmas, 2019, and once 3 days before he died when he found out Grandpa had changed the will. Ms. Whitmore stood again. Your Honor, the defendant is making emotional appeals rather than legal arguments. The question before this court is simple. Is the codicil valid? We have evidence that Colonel Chun was heavily medicated, that he was suffering from cancer-related dementia, and that the defendant had unusual access to him during his final weeks. We also have 2 handwriting experts who will testify that the signature on the codicil shows signs of tremor and hesitation inconsistent with Colonel Chun's known signature. Judge Harrington nodded. Miss Chun, do you have evidence to rebut these claims? I have the testimony of Colonel Chun's oncologist, Dr. Patricia Ramos, who will confirm that my grandfather was mentally sharp until the day before he died. I have the testimony of his hospice nurse, Margaret Klein, who was present when he signed the codicil, and I have my grandfather's own words. I lifted the journal slightly. Ms. Whitmore laughed dissectedly, laughed in court. Your Honor, the defendant is going to present her grandfather's diary as evidence. This is absurd. She could have written anything in there. The journal was sealed in my grandfather's safe with a tamper-evident closure, I said. I have the video footage of me opening it in the presence of a notary. The notary will testify that the seal was intact. Judge Harrington leaned back in his chair. Ms. Chun, what exactly is in this journal that you believe is relevant to this case? This was it. The moment everything would either vindicate me or destroy me. Your Honor. My grandfather kept detailed journals his entire adult life. This one covers the years 1987 to 1988. It contains information about classified military operations he was involved in during his service. Ms. Whitmore Your Honor, this is becoming ridiculous. The defendant is now claiming she has classified military information. This is a desperate attempt to Your Honor, I interrupted, my voice calm. I'd like to show you page 127. Judge Harrington gestured for the bailiff. Approach. I walked forward, my heart hammering, and handed the journal to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. I'd marked the page with a blue sticky note. The judge opened it and began to read. I watched his face carefully. His expression didn't change at first. Then, his eyes widened slightly. His jaw tightened. His hand, which had been resting casually on the bench, went completely still. Behind me, I could hear my father whispering urgently to his attorney. Judge Harrington looked up at me. His face had gone pale. Ms. Chun, where did you get this information? My grandfather wrote it. Your Honor. That's his handwriting. You can have it verified. The judge looked at Ms. Whitmore, then at my father, then back at me. Ms. Chun, I need you to read the entry dated March 15th, 1987, out loud. Ms. Whitmore stood. Your Honor, I must object. We have no idea what's in that journal. This could be completely fabricated. Sit down, Ms. Whitmore, Judge Harrington said. His voice had changed. It was colder now, harder. Se sat. I took the journal back from the bailiff and opened to the page. My hands weren't shaking. I'd read this entry 100 times since finding it. March 15th, 1987, I read aloud. Briefing today for Operation Cypress Fall. 23 personnel in the room. 4-star General William Harrington presiding. Mission parameters classified COP level. Billy pulled me aside afterward, asked about Sarah, told him she's doing well, misses her daddy. He said when this is over, we'll have that fishing trip we've been planning. I hope he's right. This one feels different. The courtroom was completely silent. I looked up at Judge Harrington. His face was white. Your Honor, I said quietly, my grandfather served under your father, General William Harrington, United States Air Force. Operation Cypress Fall was a classified operation that, according to my grandfather's journal, took place in March 1987. My grandfather wrote about your father's concern for you. His son Billy was 5 years old at the time. Judge Harrington's hand was gripping the edge of the bench so hard his knuckles had turned white. I continued, my voice steady. My grandfather also wrote that your father promised him a fishing trip after the operation. According to the journal, that fishing trip never happened because General Harrington died 4 months later in what was officially described as a training accident. Primera Payust. Your Honor, my grandfather spent 30 pages of this journal documenting Operation Cypress Fall. He documented it because he knew something was wrong. He knew the official story about your father's death wasn't true, and he documented it because he believed someday someone might need to know what actually happened. Behind me, my father whispered, "What the hell is she doing?" Ms. Whitmore stood slowly. Your Honor, I don't understand what this has to do with the probate case before us. Judge Harrington didn't look at her. He was staring at me. Ms. Chun, are you telling me you have detailed documentation of a classified operation from 1987? Yes, Your Honor. And you're using this information to prove that my grandfather was meticulous, mentally sharp, and careful about documentation even when it put him at risk. To prove that a man who spent 37 years hiding classified information in a sealed safe, information that could have gotten him court-martialed or worse, was not someone who could be manipulated or confused. 3 weeks before his death, I took a breath. And to prove that I'm the person he trusted with that information, not my father, not my aunt, me. Judge Harrington closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, he looked directly at my father. Mr. Chun, did you know your father kept these journals? My father stood. He looked confused, which was rare for him. I know, Your Honor. I had no idea. Did you ever ask him about his military service? Well, He didn't like to talk about it. Did you ever visit him during his cancer treatment? My father's attorney put a hand on his arm, but he shook it off. Your Honor, I don't see what this has to do with answer the question. I visited him twice, Your Honor. Twice in 5 years. I have a demanding career. I run a medical practice. I have. Did you visit him in the hospital during his final week? Yes. Once. How long did you stay? My father's jaw tightened. I don't recall exactly. I do, I said quietly. 17 minutes. You stayed 17 minutes. Duh. You asked him if he'd made any changes to his will. He said yes. You asked what changes? He said you'd find out. You left. You didn't come back. My mother stood up in the gallery. That's not fair, Sarah. Your father was busy. He has responsibilities. Sit down, ma'am, Judge Harrington said. His voice was like ice. This is my courtroom. She sat. The judge looked at me again. Ms. Chun, I need to be very clear about something. The information in this journal, if it's authentic, is potentially classified at the highest levels. Possessing it, disclosing it, or using it could have serious legal consequences. I understand, Your Honor. Then why are you showing it to me? Because my grandfather wanted someone to know the truth, and because he trusted me to use his story to protect mine. Judge Harrington was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'm going to need to see the entire journal. I'm also going to need to consult with some people before I can proceed with this case. Your Honor, Ms. Whitmore said, standing again, respectfully. None of this changes the fundamental question of whether the codicil is valid. Even if this journal is authentic, even if it shows Colonel Chun was meticulous, that doesn't prove he was competent when he signed the codicil 3 weeks before his death. Actually, Ms. Whitmore, it does, I said. I opened the journal to another marked page. Your Honor. My grandfather made his final entry in this journal on September 3rd. That was 2 days before he signed the I began to read. September 3rd, Dr. Ramos confirmed today. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Sarah came by with soup. She never forget. She sat with me for 4 hours. Didn't check her phone once. Didn't make excuses to leave, just sat with me and listened to my stories. Even Taewon ZV told her 100 times before. My voice cracked slightly, but I kept reading. I changed my will today. Michael called yesterday, asking about money. He didn't ask how I'm feeling. Didn't ask about pain levels or treatment options. Asked about money. Rebecca hasn't called in 6 months, but Sarah was here. Sarah is always here. She earned every dollar, not through blood, but through showing up. I closed the journal. Your Honor, this is dated 2 days before the codicil was signed. My grandfather's handwriting is steady. His thoughts are clear, and his intentions are documented. Judge Harrington took off his reading glasses and rubbed his eyes. I'm going to call a recess. Ms. Chun, I need you to leave that journal with the court clerk. I'm also going to need the contact information for the notary who witnessed you opening the safe, Dr. Ramos, and the hospice nurse. I have all of that prepared, Your Honor. I pulled a folder from my bag and handed it to the bailiff. This court is in recess for 2 hours, Judge Harrington said. Bailiff, please ask Ms. Chun to remain in the courtroom. Everyone else say you're dismissed. The courtroom emptied. My father tried to approach me, but the bailiff stepped between us. Sir, the judge said, everyone else is dismissed. My father stared at me for a long moment. I'd never seen that expression on his face before. It might have been fear. It might have been something else. He left. When the room was empty, except for me, the bailiff, and the court reporter, Judge Harrington came down from the bench. He wasn't wearing his robe anymore. He looked smaller somehow, more human. "Miss Chun," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something off the record." I nodded. "Did your grandfather tell you about Operation Cypress Fall? Did he tell you about my father?" "No, Your Honor. I found the journals after he died. When I opened his safe, there were 12 journals total, spanning 50 years. I've only read 3 of them so far, but this one mentioned your father 17 times. And every mention was respectful, grateful. My grandfather loved your father." Judge Harrington's eyes were wet. "My father died when I was 5. I barely remember him. The Air Force told my mother it was a training accident. She never believed them. She spent 20 years trying to get answers. She died without ever knowing what really happened to him." "I'm sorry," I said. "How much does the journal say about the operation?" "Enough that I think you deserve to know the truth about your father. Not enough that it would compromise national security. My grandfather was too careful for that. But enough?" He nodded slowly. "I'm going to recuse myself from this case." My heart sank. "Your Honor, I'm going to recuse myself because I cannot be impartial here. But I'm also going to recommend to my colleague, Judge Morrison, that she look very carefully at the evidence UV presented, particularly the handwriting analysis and the testimony of the medical professionals. And I am going to make sure she understands that Colonel James Chun was a man of exceptional character and mental fortitude." He paused. "I am also going to ask you if I can make copies of the sections of that journal that pertain to my father. I won't use them in any official capacity. I just I need to know." "Of course," I said. "You can keep the whole journal if you want. My grandfather would have wanted you to have it." "No," he said. "That journal is your inheritance. It's more valuable than any amount of money." "But thank you." He walked back toward his chambers, then stopped and turned. "Ms. Chun, your grandfather was right to trust you, and for what it's worth, I think you're going to win this case." 3 weeks later, I sat in Judge Rebecca Morrison's courtroom. She was younger than Judge Harrington, maybe 50, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She'd spent the previous 2 weeks reviewing all the evidence, interviewing witnesses, and consulting with handwriting experts. My father sat across the aisle again, but his attorney had been replaced. Ms. Whitmore had withdrawn from the case the day after Judge Harrington recused himself. The new attorney was younger, less confident, and kept glancing at me nervously. "I've reviewed all the evidence in this case," Judge Morrison said. "I've spoken with Dr. Ramos, who testified that Colonel Chun was mentally competent until approximately 18 hours before his death. I've spoken with hospice nurse Margaret Klein, who witnessed the signing of the codicil, and confirmed that Colonel Chun was lucid, alert, and adamant about his wishes. I've reviewed the notarized video of Ms. Chun opening Colonel Chun's safe, and I've reviewed the journal entries." She looked at my father. "Mr. Chun, I've also reviewed the phone records showing that you called your father 47 times in the 3 months after he was diagnosed with cancer. According to his medical records, you visited him twice. According to call logs, 43 of those calls lasted less than 5 minutes. The remaining 4 calls lasted between 8 and 12 minutes. My father sat very still. "I've also reviewed Ms. Sarah Chun's phone records. She called her grandfather an average of once per day for the final year of his life. Her visits to his home documented by the building as security logs show that she visited every Sunday for 10 years, and increased to 3 times per week during his final 6 months." Judge Morrison picked up a piece of paper. "The codicil before this court is valid. It was signed by a mentally competent individual who had every right to distribute his estate as he saw fit. The evidence shows that Colonel Chun made this decision thoughtfully, deliberately, and with full understanding of his actions." She looked directly at my father. "Mr. Chun, your father left his estate to his granddaughter, not because she manipulated him, not because he was confused, but because she earned it through years of consistent, selfless devotion to his well-being. That may be painful for you to hear, but it's the truth. She banged her gavel. The codicil is upheld. Colonel James Chun's entire estate passes to Sarah Chun, as specified in the codicil dated September 5th. Case dismissed. My father didn't try to talk to me as we left the courthouse. My mother called me 3 times that afternoon. I didn't answer. Marcus sent me a text. "You're really going to take everything. That's messed up." I deleted it. That evening, I drove to the cemetery where Grandpa was buried. I sat on the grass next to his headstone and told him about the trial, about Judge Harrington, about the look on my father's face when he realized I'd actually won. "You were right, Grandpa," I said. "You told me people show you who they are by what they do when it costs them something. Dad showed up when he thought there was money in it for him. He disappeared when there wasn't." I traced the letters on his headstone with my finger. Colonel James Chun. Beloved father and grandfather, 1940 to 2024. "I'm going to use the money to finish my degree," I told him. "I'm going to do the things you and I talked about. I'm going to travel. I'm going to write. I am going to live the kind of life that makes someone want to show up for me the way I showed up for you." The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice. "That's my girl. That's exactly right." A week after the trial, I received a letter from Judge Harrington. It wasn't on court letterhead, just a simple white envelope with his personal return address. Inside was a single page, handwritten, "Dear Sarah, thank you for the copies of the journal entries about my father. I've shared them with my siblings. We spent an entire evening reading them together, crying, laughing, learning about a man we barely got to know. My father's official military record is sparse. It mentions his medals, but not the operations that earned them. Your grandfather's journal fills in those gaps. It shows me that my father was brave, principled, and deeply devoted to the people he served, with especially your grandfather. I want you to know that I've forwarded information about Operation Cypress Fall to the appropriate authorities. I don't know what will come of it, if anything. These things move slowly, if they move at all. But your grandfather's testimony has been heard. More importantly, I want you to know that your grandfather would be immensely proud of you, not because you won in court, but because you fought for the truth, with dignity and courage. You honored his memory in the best possible way. Take care of yourself, Sarah, and take care of those journals. They're more than just your inheritance. They're a piece of history. With deepest respect, Judge William Harrington. I folded the letter carefully and added it to the box where I kept Grandpa's journals. My phone buzzed. My father's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a moment, then declined the call. Some bridges, once burned, aren't worth rebuilding. I had Grandpa's journals. I had his stories. I had his love, documented in 50 years of careful handwriting. I had his legacy and the freedom to build my own. That was enough. That was everything.